Hi, good evening, and welcome to an online meeting of the Burbank Planning Board on Monday, August 23rd, 2021. Before we begin our meeting, there will be separate periods of public comment tonight, one for the public hearing and one for general comment period towards the end of the meeting. Persons speaking during the public hearing may only address the planning board regarding that hearing. Persons speaking during the general public comment period may provide the planning board oral communication on any matter concerning city business. If you'd like to participate in the public comment periods, please call 818-238-3335. We'll announce when the phone lines are open. Will everyone please rise for the invocation? Call on a very productive and congenial meeting for tonight, and looking forward to hearing from the public.
Please join me in saluting our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Now we'll do the roll call. Mr. Rosati?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Board Member Gamboa?
Present.
Board Member Monaco?
Present.
Board Member Heiner?
Present.
Board Member Otakunian? Let the record show Board Member Otakunian is absent.
In order to balance the health risks associated with COVID-19 and the public's right to conduct the people's business in a transparent and open manner during the current state of emergency and in the interest of public health and safety, board members will be participating in an online planning board meeting. City facilities are closed to the public until further notice, and the public will not be able to physically attend today's meeting. The city is providing alternatives to in-person attendance for viewing and participating in planning board meetings. In lieu of the in-person attendance, members of the public may participate in the public comment period by calling 818-238-3335. Are there any announcements from city staff?
No, there are not.
Okay, no announcements. So we'll move to item E, the hearings. There is on public hearing on tonight's agenda. Now is the time and place for the hearing on project number 20-0005504 concerning a zone text amendment to amend the zoning definitions R1 and R1H single family residential zone land use table and the R2, R3, and R4 multiple family residential land use table to allow short-term rentals. Before we begin, do any planning board members have any legal or other conflict of interest relating to this hearing?
No.
No.
No. Okay. Have any planning board members had any communications, including written or oral, with any person?
No.
I have had lots of people contact me regarding this, and I basically told them that they'd hear my deliberation tonight.
Mr. Ramirez, have the notices been required by law been given?
Yes, they have.
And are there any written communications on this matter?
Yes, there have been communications that have been submitted electronically, and I believe the board has received copies of those, and they've also been uploaded onto the city's website.
Right. Will the representative of the Community Development Department please introduce yourself and summarize the matter for us?
Just give us a moment. We're bringing up the presentation shortly.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Board. My name is Karen Pan, Administrative Officer with Community Development Department. I'm here with my colleague Nick Barant, and we'll be providing the board and the public information about short-term rentals. Staff is recommending that the planning board adopt a resolution approving the project to amend R1, sorry about that, to amend R1 and R1H single-family residential zone land use table and the R2, R3, and R4 multifamily residential land use table to allow short-term rentals. Oh, sorry, let me turn on my camera. Based on the 2019 data, there are approximately 400 to 500 listings in Burbank. With the rise of short-term rental, municipalities have responded by creating regulatory programs. Today, Burbank does not have a regulatory program for short-term rentals. This started in June of last year, where City Council directed staff to prepare an ordinance to obtain public input. During the past year and a half, staff has been working with other cities to understand how they have responded to short-term rentals, like Glendale and Pasadena. This also includes cities that have banned short-term rental, allowed short-term rental, and have went back and forth between banning and allowing short-term rental. Staff also spent time talking to cities like Palm Desert and La Quinta of their recent experiences. During this process to understand public's input, staff hosted 2 community workshops, an online community survey as well. The proposed ordinance was initially presented to Planning Board in December of last year, and Planning Board made a motion to not approve the resolution. The Planning Board also made another motion to bring back the proposed resolution to allow short-term rentals as a business license with an additional community meeting to understand public's input, an additional online community survey, a defined cost analysis, a clarification on the initial proposal of the 900 business license limit, which we'll go into detail, and understand Palm Desert and La Quinta's regulatory program.
In addition to the planning board's feedback, staff undertook a second community survey to understand how short-term rentals are affecting Burbank and to learn about the community's perspective on regulating short-term rentals. The second survey had over 600 respondents, which was significantly more than the first survey. Staff conducted additional outreach and gathered information requested by the planning board. Now we will go over the additional requested information. Next slide, please. Staff held a third online community workshop on March 11th, and it had about 35 participants. Residents mentioned many different issues surrounding staff proposal, but the broad feedback focused on allowing or regulating short-term rentals more broadly, unhosted stays, and enforcement. The feedback from this community workshop informed staff on how the second community survey was constructed. Next slide. Most of the questions in the 2021 survey had similar response breakdowns as the first survey. For example, about 15 respondents indicated that short-term rentals positively impacted them and their families. A large plurality of residents were neutral about the impact of short-term rentals, and about 35% of respondents indicated that their families were negatively impacted by short-term rentals. Next slide. We asked 3 new questions during this survey, which was informed by the third community meeting staff held in March. We asked how the city should regulate short-term rentals. The responses showed a slight plurality favoring an explicit ban at 37%, then 34% favoring the creation of a new program, and with the remaining favoring the status quo. Next slide. Our second question had to do with the proposed business license limit. Burbank has over 44,000 housing units. The city's proposed regulations included initial proposed regulations included a 900 limit on the number of business licenses that can be issued for short-term rentals in Burbank. The 900 business license limit represented approximately 2% of the city's housing stock today. What are your thoughts on the 900 limit? A slight majority of respondents thought the limit was too high, and roughly a quarter of the respondents thought the proposed limit was either too low or just right, respectively. Next slide. Our third new question asked if a hosted stay should be required for short-term rentals. A hosted stay means that the homeowner or host is available on site during the guest stay. 60% of respondents indicated that hosted stays should be required, while 40% indicated that they should not be. You can reference Exhibit F for further details of the survey results in our agenda packet.
As part of public outreach, we also looked at businesses who are our stakeholders. We had reached out to Burbank Hospitality Association and Chamber of Commerce. Both provided support to know that it's good that the city has proposed regulations that set the same standards as they do as in hotels. And staff also met with Burbank Association of Realtors, and they did not take a position. And during this research, staff saw how short-term rentals impacted their community, and staff learned that neighboring cities have had very different experience with addressing short-term rentals. For City of Glendale, they recently passed their regulation in 2019. Glendale allows hosted stays and does not allow unhosted stays, and there's no cap on the number of days per year a host can rent out their property. Glendale's rules also includes a permitted process and a TOT, which is transit occupancy tax component. For City of Pasadena, short-term rentals impacted their community. Staff conducted initial public outreach in 2016. Residents and stakeholders expressed their concerns about short-term rentals impacting their neighborhood, especially near the Rose Bowl district. When their staff presented their proposed regulation in 2017, Pasadena at that time had about 750 short-term rental listing. With much consideration, Planning Board and City Council ultimately approved an ordinance to allow short-term rentals with restrictions in Pasadena. And more information about other surveys that were included as part of this research is included in Exhibit C. At the December Planning Board meeting, Vice Chair Rosati asked staff to investigate short-term rental situations that are happening at La Quinta and Palm Desert. What staff found in both cities were robust short-term rental regulatory programs that each had their own issues that were being worked through with respective staff, communities, and city council. In La Quinta, the city moved to restrict new permits due to a high uptick in visitors in 2020 due to COVID restrictions on traveling. The moratorium has lowered the number of short-term rentals in the city from a high 1,350 to 1,250 in early May, which is when staff spoke to their staff, and their population in La Quinta is 41,000. In Palm Desert, the city updated their eligibility criteria to fix the regulatory loophole that they found during their program. Most of the city is covered by planned communities, and the city bans short-term rentals from operating in those planned communities that do not have homeowners association. The city went from about 1,000 short-term rentals at the end of 2019 to about 750 when staff spoke to them early this year, and their population is about $53,000. Today, both cities have short-term rental regulatory program allowing short-term rental, but with specific restrictions in their city.
Staff learned a lot about how other cities regulate short-term rentals, and a few themes emerged. Almost all cities have a regulatory structure that includes a mandatory business license or permit requirement for any host seeking to rent out their units. This allows city staffs to keep an up-to-date registry of hosts, allowing for real-time compliance. This can take the form of working with hosting platforms such as Airbnb to delist non-compliant properties so that they cannot operate in their cities. Another emerging theme is that proposed regulations should be a sustainable framework that balances regulations for host and hosting platforms with reasonable limits. The overall goal of short-term rental regulations is to ensure guests enjoy visiting Burbank safely and that neighborhoods are not negatively impacted. Having clear expectations around noise, trash, parking, and other neighborhood concerns are important components for a regulatory program. Essentially, the city's goal of the proposed regulations brings short-term rentals under a similar regulatory structure to the one currently governing Burbank's hotels.
Staff found that the ordinance is compatible with objectives, policies, and programs and land use described in the general plan. The proposed restrictions and regulations on short-term rentals that we have shared at this part of the presentation will limit the distribution, number, duration, and impact on neighborhoods, preserving the low-density residential character of the city's single-family residential neighborhoods. The proposed ordinance also will provide opportunities for mom and pop operators of short-term rentals and require short-term rentals participate in the city's TOT program, diversifying the city's economic base and improving its long-term economic vitality diversity. Additionally, as outlined in Article 10.1.1991 of the Burbank Municipal Code, there are 9 criteria for adding a use, and this is also listed in Exhibit A in your packet. First, staff found that short-term rental use to be added to the land use table is consistent with the purposes of single-family and multifamily residential zones. The regulations will manage and limit the overall impact through licensing and ongoing enforcement in a manner that reduces impact to existing residential neighborhoods. Second, it would allow short-term rentals to be consistent with the basic characteristics of the city's residential zones due to the proposed regulations that limit their impact. Third, it would not change existing residential occupancy and applicable health and safety orders, and the short-term rental can be expected to conform with the required conditions of the city's residential zones. Fourth, it would be subject to the ongoing compliance with the applicable regulations noted in the proposed ordinance that will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. Fifth, the proposed ordinance allows new definition and enforcement requirements that will preserve the purpose and intent of the city's residential zones by ensuring that the rentals are subject to the regulatory provisions. It addresses noise, on-site parking, health and safety codes. Staff determined the use would not adversely affect the character of the zone. And 6, it would not create more vehicular or other traffic other than the volume normally created by any other uses permitted in the residential zones, as on-site parking will be required, consistent with the current requirements, and because Burbank residential streets are already designed to handle capacity from residential guests. 7th, the proposed use will not create more odor, dust, dirt, smoke, noise, vibration, illumination, glare, unsightliness, and other objectable influence other than normally created by any other permitted use, as the provisions of the ordinance provide city remedies for enforcement. 8, the proposed use will not create a greater hazard of fire or explosion than the hazards created by any other permitted use, as short-term rental will be limited to guest occupancy and the use of short-term rental is a habitation only under the same building code and life and safety standards that are required of residential zones. And 9th, the proposed ordinance will not cause substantial injury to property value in residential or abutting zones. The administration and enforcement of the program will protect community character of the city's residential zones or any abutting zones.
To recap, during the past year and a half, staff researched and talked to cities and residents on how to regulate short-term rentals. Neighboring cities have already addressed short-term rentals like Glendale and Pasadena, and what staff is presenting to you today is a synthesis of the best practices learned from other cities, feedback from stakeholders since the past planning board meeting, incorporated into a proposed ordinance that is designed for Burbank. Before jumping into staff's recommendation, there are 3 options on how the city can regulate short-term rentals, and we asked the community in the last survey in May of 2021. The first option is the status quo. This means that there would be no explicit language about short-term rentals in the municipal code, and the city would respond to complaints as they arise. This also means that those that are operating wouldn't be providing information to the city, and they wouldn't be paying their fair share of transient occupancy tax. The second option is an explicit ban, and this would be an entirely new city program. This means the city will need additional resources to enforce a ban and would be a fiscal impact to the city. Staff anticipates the initial cost of this program would be approximately $225,000, and staff will talk more about the details of this later on in the presentation. This approach also does not collect transient occupancy tax. The third option is to create a regulatory program allowing short-term rentals with regulations. Staff is recommending option 3, and we will go over the details. The slide that is shown is from the online survey taken from data collected from April to May of 2021. When the community was asked, 37% recommended an explicit ban, 34% recommended a new program, and 29% recommended the status quo. The City Council ordinance includes 3 amendments to Title 10 of the Burbank Municipal Code, which is the city's zoning regulations. The first is to add definitions for short-term rentals and short-term rental unit. The next 2 are to add short-term rental unit as a permitted use in single-family residential zones R1 and R1H and multiple family residential zones R2, R3, and R4. The permitted use would be governed by a regulatory program in a new article to Title III of the Burbank Municipal Code as a business license. We'll go over that proposed program in the coming slides. Next slide. The proposed regulations are drafted with the guiding principle to protect neighborhoods, and it includes a list of expectations and standards for all parties to ensure guests can enjoy visiting Burbank, as well as ensuring that hosts and neighbors are not adversely impacted. Staff believes that adding a regulation that states that only primary residents may operate short-term rentals will play a significant part to ensure neighborhoods maintain their character and deter bad behavior. Staff also worked the proposed standards for monetary fines for enforcement. This program, which we will talk about more later in the presentation, will create a new process for enforcement that is unique for short-term rentals. Here's the overview of the regulatory program to protect neighborhoods. Before we review it, it is important to reiterate that this recommendation is a synthesis of the best practices from other cities and customized into provisions that fit for Burbank. The items in red are the changes from the proposed regulations presented in December to the Planning Board in December of 2020. We're proposing to allow short-term rentals with a regulatory structure governing their operation in Burbank. There will be a 120 days per year cap on their operations. Accessory dwelling units cannot be used as short-term rentals, and we will be requiring primary residency for all hosts, meaning that a host must live in the unit that they are renting out for at least 8 months out of the year. This also means that a host cannot operate more than 1 short-term rental unit in Burbank. Staff is now proposing a 600 business license limit, and that hosts must respond to complaints within 1 hour of receiving the complaint or be subject to a fine. For example, if you own and live in a single-family dwelling unit, short-term rentals are allowed. You can rent out a portion of your dwelling unit or rent out the whole dwelling unit for a maximum of 120 days per year. Next slide. If you rent and live in a single-family dwelling unit, then you need written approval from your landlord in order to apply for a short-term rental business license. If you own multiple single-family dwelling units, only 1 dwelling unit can be used for short-term rentals if it is your primary residence where you're living there for at least 8 months out of the year. And then, next slide. And then lastly, if you live in and own a single-family dwelling unit with an ADU, your primary residence is the accessory dwelling unit, short-term rentals are not allowed. And it's because accessory dwelling units cannot be used as a short-term rental where you've identified that that is your primary residence. Your single-family dwelling unit has a separate address, and you've identified that you do not live in the single-family unit, and it is not your primary residence. As a result, you cannot use the ADU or the single-family dwelling unit.
So with the proposed regulation, staff is proposing a regulatory structure where it would start out with a business license for every short-term rental host that would be required to obtain. Licensees would be required to pay the annual fee to keep their license up to date, and every host would also be required to list their license number on their short-term rental advertisements. City staff decided to limit the number of licenses to 600 in order to help with the limit any future impacts of short-term rental on city neighborhoods. And the staff is also planning to provide an advanced checklist to all prospective short-term rental hosts so they clearly understand what is expected of the license application process. Hosts will also have a set of responsibility as well. First, hosts must provide the city with the contact information. Second, no advertisement may be visible to the public on the host property, which is similar to the other home-based businesses. And third, the city is proposing to have several safety provisions that hosts must abide by. Hosts will be required to have operational fire extinguisher, working carbon monoxide and smoke alarms, as well as a fire evacuation map posted in the rental unit. And hosts that are not on a hosting platform must remit their TOT to the city. But overall, the hosts, as a requirement, must remit TOT on behalf of the city, or to the city. Other requirements that we have is related to trash. Host is responsible for the trash, and hosts will need to provide on-site parking spots for guests, and there's a maximum occupancy at any given time for the listing, and it would be 1,600, which is consistent with Airbnb policies. For shared responsibilities between a host and a guest, the proposed regulation states that there are no events, commercial events, weddings, parties, would not be allowed for short-term rental activities. There's a requirement to still meet the noise ordinance, and there are required hours between 10 to 7. And the guests is the ones that are required to pay the transit occupancy tax. Hosting platforms will also have requirements where they will make sure that the listings include the business license number posted, and they're required to have a liaison to coordinate with city if there are any issues that might come up, and they'll also assist in removing listings that are not compliant with the city's regulations.
Current enforcement is complaint-based and reactive. Staff receives about 10 to 12 complaints every year, and they are typically resolved with communication between code enforcement staff and the owner of the offending property. To enforce the proposed regulations, the short-term rental fines will be listed as part of the citywide fee schedule. If a host violates the short-term rental regulations or operates without a business license, the first offense is $1,500. $3,000 for the second offense, and the third offense is $5,000, plus up to 12 months of the business license suspension and or revocation. The purpose of the proposed change is to protect the neighbors and to ensure high compliance with hosts and guests. This means that the proposed regulations would make hosts and guests think twice about bad behavior. We'll also have a new standard process and tools for enforcement. The city is planning on contracting with a company called HDL for the identification of hosts and to handle business license administration. HDL uses an algorithm to scrape short-term rental websites and cross-reference that data with publicly available data to determine who is operating short-term rentals. They essentially create a digital fingerprint that staff can use to manage the short-term rental program.
With a proposed ordinance to City Council, there is a cost of approximately $225,500 to cover the contractual services for code enforcement, administrative support, and the online system for the business license and TOT collection. The potential recurring annual revenue to the general fund is anticipated to be $600,000.
As a response to the feedback from both the December Planning Board meeting and the community meeting in March of 2021, staff is providing the alternative of an explicit ban for the Planning Board to consider. This is different from the ban by omission from the city's zoning code that is currently in place. The explicit ban would include a ban in the city's zoning code. Short-term rentals would be defined and then added to the city's use tables as non-permitted uses, formalizing what is currently in place. Next slide. The ban would have the same fines as the staff recommended alternative. The fiscal impact of the ban would have the same expenses, contractor, and staff requests. However, staff expects little revenue from fines and no TOT revenue, meaning there would be a high cost and no revenue to offset that cost.
So here on this slide, you see two tables. The first table shows an analysis of what a regulatory program looks like to allow short-term rental. With this analysis, we anticipate approximately 350 licenses being issued. Knowing that we're about 400 to 500 listings pre-COVID, we anticipate some people not registering because they do not want to participate or they're not eligible for the program itself because of the requirements. And so that annual revenue is approximately $100,000, and the TOT is looking at a rate for a unit at $130 with the 120-day limit, and that would be approximately TOT revenue of $500,000. There is the operational costs, and that's shown on the screen. The second table is a regulatory program that would be banning short-term rental. We anticipate some fines from enforcement, but there would be no revenue or city fiscal impact regarding the fee or TOT, and there would be an operational cost to ban a short-term rental activity. Next steps is to share the information about Planning Board's recommendation to City Council at the September 14th City Council meeting hearing. And staff is recommending that the Planning Board approve the resolution approving this project to amend the R1 and R1H single-family residential zone land use table and the R2, R3, R4 multiple family residential land use table to allow short-term rental activities. This concludes our presentation. We do have staff that's available to answer questions about this subject. We have staff from our police department as well as our community development department who oversees the business license as well as code enforcement. And Nick and I are available to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Chair, if I can just, a couple of things just to clarify, just because I know people are listening
Sure.
to the audio. Karen, just to clarify, the maximum occupancy being considered for short-term rentals is 16, right? For one occupancy?
That's correct. The proposed regulation says 16 at any given time.
Correct. And then I think in one of the two cities that were analyzed, I believe it was the second one, it was a population of 53,000. And was that La Quinta or Palm Desert? And that's just because the audio might pick up the fact, I think in one we said 1,600 occupancy and then 53,000, so I don't want to.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Just so that if someone's doesn't have video, but they're hearing the audio, that would probably make me jump out of my chair. So.
No worries. Let me find that really fast.
So Palm Desert has a population of 53,000.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. We'll now open the public hearing to hear from any persons who wish to speak on the matter. Each person may address the planning board for a maximum time of 3 minutes. To address the planning board, please call 818-238-3335. Phone lines are now open. Please bear with us as it may take a couple of minutes for the first callers to get through the line. Again, the number is 818-238-3335.
Hello, Jonah. You're on live with the planning board.
Thank you very much. Honorable Planning Board, my name is Jonah Breslau. I work with Unite Your Local 11, the Hospitality Workers Union in Southern California. We represent 32,000 members in Southern California and Arizona. And we believe that a ban is the most effective way to address the challenges created by these commercial uses, short-term rentals in residential zones. We're in a housing crisis. First and foremost, we need to protect housing, not convert it into tourist rentals. Moreover, short-term rentals, by turning homes into de facto hotels, besides exacerbating our regional housing crisis, they erode neighborhood character. More than 20 cities in Southern California have voted to ban short-term rentals, and Burbank should join them. However, if the city decides not to pursue a ban, we urge you to tighten the language around the primary residence requirements. We believe that Santa Monica's law has stronger and clearer language that ensures that we only have legitimate home sharing, which is less harmful to neighbors than and to the housing stock than the absentee hosts allowed by LA, which is similar to the definition used here. And as you heard, 60% of those surveyed also agreed that hosts should be on site. So, as you've heard, a plurality supports a ban, and we believe that ultimately ban protects the most housing and leads to the clearest enforcement rules. But in any case, we certainly believe that stronger residency and home sharing requirements, if short of a ban, would do the most to protect housing and to protect the community. So please, take the most forceful action possible. Protect housing for working people. Protect housing for the sake of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair, we do have a couple more calls coming through the queue.
Great.
Jay, you're on live with the planning board.
Hi, Planning Board. I am a small-time homeowner and a small-time short-term renter. The last caller mentioned that we should protect housing and we should maximize the number of units that are available to Californians and to attack this housing crisis. However, I would strongly disagree with his method of banning, and I would also disagree with the Planning Board's proposals of a 120-day cap and all hosts having to live on site alongside a 1-hour response to complaints or be fined. My argument would be that at current, the city only invests $15 million in housing and economic development. $11 million goes to Section 8, which assists people in paying their rent, and $1 million in affordable housing. And then another almost $2 million in the HUD program. Now, the city's entire budget is over $650 million, so housing welfare is an extremely small percentage of this overall budget. It would make more sense to allow short-term rental units to flourish and simply tax them. Now, if we look at other cities out of state, in Massachusetts, 6 small towns generated $5.5 million in tax revenue from short-term rentals. They only have a population of 17,000 residents, while this city has over 100,000. Not to mention that we are also a hub city, so we could draw in revenue all year round. As it stands, we might even be able to double or triple the total budget that we have in housing development and Section 8. So, that being said, maximizing the total number of units by going through with all these proposals wouldn't necessarily even solve the housing crisis. because even if you made so many units available, rent control is still at 5% statewide, so the rent price isn't going down. What you have to do is focus on subsidized housing, and to help people pay their rent, you need to do this through bolstering the budget in Section 8, which you can do through short-term rentals, and again, you can double or triple the current budget in there. Not to mention that we are at the end of a pandemic almost, and we need the economic stimulation. By allowing short-term rentals, you're encouraging people from out of state or out of city to bring their resources into Burbank and put it into the hands of landowners here. So
I believe you've reached your 3 minutes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. That'll be all.
Is this Tamala? Tamala, you're on live with the planning board.
Great, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Tamala Takahashi. I'm a 22-year resident of Burbank, and I have attended all of the community meetings regarding this topic. First, I want to thank the staff for this more thought-out version of the proposed ordinance than the previous version. It's clear how much research that you did on putting this together, and as a resident, I appreciate you having done this for a better proposal. I think that this proposal is much improved compared to the previous one. I have a few questions and a request to the commission. The first question is, what is the phase-in schedule for this ordinance? Would it basically be like a light switch that would turn on, or would it phase in slowly? And how would those who have current listings, how would they be informed, and how would that be phased in? Or phased out, I guess, in some cases. My second question is, for the 120 days, how will that be monitored? And is that monitored through reporting, or is that monitored through a program where somebody's looking for that online? And then the 120 days, is that January to December, or is that during any 365 consecutive days? And then my last question is, does this apply to condos and multiplexes as well? And then my request is this proposal, while it's well thought out, and I think it's a much improved version, it's also, to be honest, quite complicated. Not so complicated as not to be able to be followed, but it's something that I think the community needs to be informed about. Especially, the businesses need to be informed, but especially the neighbors who are wondering what the new ordinance might be. So, my request is that included in this process, perhaps have an education plan of how the community will be informed, including something like PSAs or other kinds of information for the community. Thanks a lot for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any more callers in the queue?
Yes, they're coming through.
Thank you.
Marvele, you're on live with the planning board.
Hi, good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Margaret Kornblatt, and I'm a homeowner in Burbank. I'm a little bit confused about staff goals. At the present time, council tomorrow night will be discussing SB 35, and I expect in the future SB 9 and 10, which stand to create a substantial impact on all the residents of Burbank. So I think that all of this needs to be tabled until the impacts of those issues are addressed. I heard staff mention one page regarding enforcement fees if there's an outright ban, and several pages of stipulations if it were approved, including safety measures and trash and that, and we didn't mention what that would cost to the city. And the fact remains that puts the onus on the neighbors to police the short-term rentals. To suggest that wouldn't affect the character of single-family neighborhoods is naive, and much less the property values. You have people that pay, $1 million for their home and several $100,000 worth of property taxes, and to suggest that they're not going to be negatively impacted by short-term rentals next door is not realistic. So those are my concerns. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Chair, we have about 4 more callers in the queue coming through.
Great. Thank you.
Jonah, you're on live with the planning board.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, yes. Hi, yes. Thank you for taking my call. I am pleased to see a lot of progress in this presentation as well. Although I still have reserves, a couple of areas would be the monetary fines that are enforced. I'm glad they've been increased, but I still would like to know about the enforcement of those. I believe that if there are already so many places that are doing this illegally, I'm wondering if there have been steps to stop those. Also, the mentioning of on-site parking. Our particular street has parking on one half of the street, and the other half has an alley access. And the house that is across the street that has been kind of a thorn in our side has they have access to parking, but I guarantee you we see 5 or 6 cars still coming out weekly into this home, zooming down the street. Now we've got street racing too to add to it. We're not happy about that. So a lot of it, I guess, my questions go to this enforcement. We have 2-hour parking on our street as well, and there's never anyone except for possibly once in a while on street cleaning does police enforce the parking 2-hour. We have it every day. We're very close to a larger street, so it's a zoo. I understand the need to build revenue, but I think that there still has to be more protection for the existing community and the landowners. Sorry. Thank you.
Kim, you're on live with the planning board.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys involving us and also looking into this further. I have been a responsible host on different platforms for 10 years plus. I've also used short-term rentals. So my view may not be as favorable. I bought a home in Burbank because of the rent control laws. I grew up here in Burbank. A year and a half ago, I believe, we still have 3.5 years to go, Burbank is now a rent-controlled city. When the inception of COVID happened, I had a full-time tenant. That tenant then decided, because of the COVID moratorium on evictions, he was going to stop paying. Luckily, I was able to get him out prior to any of these issues, but had I not, he would have stopped paying, even though he was still receiving revenue, paying other people to take care of some of his issues, like his dog and traveling. So I would have lost my home based on this. I do not agree with the 120 days. That's 4 months. In California, it is 30 days, becomes a lease. Then if someone decides not to pay, we then have to evict them. That can cause homeowners to lose their homes. Those are not fair rules and regulations, and I would like those to be thought about and addressed. I have received, before I started to do a short-term rental here, I made sure with all of my neighbors that it was okay. I have actually housed my neighbors when they've had construction or something happening at their homes. I've housed nurses through COVID who didn't have any place else to go. So some of us are responsible, and some of us should not be penalized. I do understand the majority of business owners using this as a business to make money, and some of us use this as a business to keep our homes. And so I do believe that there needs to be an understanding of that. With regards to the 1 hour response time, if somebody's traveling or their internet is down, they're going to be fined because they're not able to respond. I would like that to be looked into as well. I do agree with hosting on site or having the owner be the person that is responsible. I 100% agree with that. With issues of parking, I do understand that there are limited areas of parking. I do believe that there should be parking for short-term rentals.
Thank you,
Whether
Kim.
that,
Your 3 minutes has been reached.
thank you, committee, for listening.
Alyssa, you're on live with the planning board.
Hi, my name is Elisa Cunningham, and I'm a resident of Burbank. As we see across the country, certainly in lots of places in California, Airbnb continues to be a windfall for investors, both big and small. We have a housing shortage, so taking stock out to service investors just doesn't make any sense. Businesses don't belong in our residential neighborhoods, and the only way it would make sense is to require the owner to live on site. It's nice that there are all these rules that are going to be put in place, but the issue will always be enforcement. These companies have not assisted any other city in enforcing the rules, and they certainly won't with Burbank. Thank you.
Laura, you're on live with the planning board.
Hi, this is Laura LaRocca. I live in the Rancho of Burbank, and I'm just calling to, I'm opposed to having short-term rentals in mainly the Rancho area. It is a special part of Burbank. We have a lot of animals that walk on the streets, horses, goats, even turtles. And I feel that having short-term rentals in our area specifically, people don't understand this area if you're not from here. They don't love this area like the residents love this area. I'm concerned about the traffic, the safety, just the overall character of this neighborhood. And I would just like you to consider not changing or not allowing short-term rentals in the Rancho part of Burbank. Thank you.
There are no more callers in the queue.
Thank you. There being no further public comment, I now declare the public comment period closed. Would the representatives of the Community Development Department like to make any further comments?
Before Nick and I respond, I just wanted to double check, since it's a virtual meeting, if there are other departments here, our police and community development department would like to respond to any of the questions first. All right. Nick, do you want to start off?
Yes, thank you, Karen. I'm going to answer the questions that Tamala Takahashi brought up. For the phase-in schedule for the ordinance, we are planning on a several months-long phase-in. We will need some time to work with our contractor to develop our processes, and they will need some time to identify the short-term rentals that are operating in the city. So we expect maybe a 3 to 4 month launch period before the ordinance is being actively enforced. In terms of the 120-day cap, the contractor that we are planning to come to an agreement with, HDL, has the capability of monitoring that 120-day cap. They have the capabilities to see if properties have been rented out and can tally that over the course of the fiscal year, which is the third question. We'll be using the fiscal year timeframe to manage that. And as for condos and multiplexes, at least for condos, it will depend on whether or not short-term rentals are allowed under the CC&Rs there, and the same thing will be the case for leases at multiple or big apartment buildings. If it's prohibited by the lease there, then it would be prohibited to operate. Thank you.
Other comments were made about SB 35 and the proposed regulations about short-term rental. SB 35 is a separate topic, and it'll be discussed at the next council meeting tomorrow, and that is related to state law. And with short-term rentals, short-term rentals has been around for the past decade and has grown in the past decade, and Burbank is one of the cities that are responding later compared to our neighbor cities like Glendale, Pasadena, Santa Monica, Orange County, and other counties as well. But during that time, and it has been a while, the good thing is that we've learned a lot about best practices through these cities. One of it being looking at a cap of the number of days that someone can list out their property. And we wanted to have regulations that was more simple and defined on what the regulations are, so the public is aware and they can be educated on the regulations and they wouldn't get lost. And we took this time really to understand, how can we propose a program allowing short-term rental, but be mindful that we have to have regulations that protect our neighborhoods. And overall, our program, we've learned that this is the way of how the city can respond to these activities. And through this proposed regulation, we'll know who is participating. There is an eligibility requirement. And if someone is out of compliance, that we would be able to enforce it with the fines. And we're hoping that the fines will help make sure that people participate in our compliance. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this program is what staff is proposing is that it allows people to participate, but it only allows Burbank residents to participate. So if you're a large company that wants to host short-term rentals in Burbank, you would not be allowed. You're not eligible. If you're someone that owns multiple properties in Burbank, you also would not be able to participate in this regulatory program. And so it's solely for Burbank residents to participate as a host and to be able to have guests stay. And we've heard through the stories that there's difference of opinions on how short-term rental has impacted their family. And we've heard a lot of comments throughout this past year and a half through emails and phone calls. And we greatly appreciate everyone's effort in helping us to find these proposed regulations today. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Chair, if I can add a little bit, or actually ask the question for staff to follow up on. Three things, Nick and Karen, and maybe this actually might be assistance from other staff that are here. So just the question regarding calendar year or fiscal year, so July 1st to June 30th of year is what we're anticipating to be the time frame?
Yes.
Okay. And then maybe you guys can talk a little bit. There was a discussion regarding home sharing versus unhosted, and kind of based on the feedback we got, why we kind of ended up bringing back an ordinance that has both as options.
Okay, so regarding home sharing and unhosted, or home sharing, which for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to call hosted stays versus unhosted stays. We considered the community's feedback, and I'm going to ask Ron Takiguchi, our city's building official, to chime in a little bit here, but we found that it would be extremely difficult to monitor whether or not hosted stays it would be very difficult to enforce hosted stays versus unhosted stays. And Ron, if you could talk a little bit about your experience with the city of Santa Monica and how they were operating their program there, because they only allow hosted stays in the city.
Good evening, Chair Gambo and board members. Ron Takiguchi, Assistant Community Development Director and City Building Official. And to address exactly what Nick said, and to give perspective from another city that has a short-term rental program, our previous jurisdiction of the city of Santa Monica, it was very difficult to enforce whether the host is there or not. And we're intending to offer that option here, and that's through part of the registration program. So when a host applies for a business license, they would have to state whether they're a hosted stay or unhosted stay, as Nick mentioned. And that would give staff the tool to understand if they will be on site or have an agent or not be there in an unhosted scenario. So we do the process and through the registration, and the business license registration will be a very complete process with all the ordinance requirements that the applicant would have to attest to and agree to at the time of application, and as well as a contact number, so we can follow up, as mentioned, with where the host would be required to respond within 1 hour.
And then the last question really is kind of, it's a little more robust in the sense of the question might lead to just a better understanding of how we undertake code enforcement. I think a couple of callers asked the question as far as overall enforcement now versus with a set of regulations in place. And I think it really gets at the issue of reactive versus proactive code enforcement. Maybe Ron, I'm not sure if you and or Colin can maybe speak to that.
Yeah, and thank you, Fred. And Chair Gamboa, if you allow me, I'd like to turn over to my code enforcement manager, Mr. Colin Ogle, to talk about not only current enforcement in the cases that we have now and what code enforcement does in response to that, but also proposals for the proposed program of code enforcement. So Colin?
Good evening, Chair Gamboa, Vice Chair Rosati, and board members. My name is Colin Ogle. I'm the Code Enforcement Manager for the City of Burbank. Currently, code enforcement is reactive, meaning that we receive complaints regarding short-term rentals and we investigate those complaints. Currently, one of the biggest issues with handling short-term rentals or identifying those addresses. So this proposed ordinance would help identify those addresses so that we could move forward with whether it be a ban or making sure they're meeting all the requirements of the ordinance for registration. So currently, like the presentation mentioned, in 2018 we had 10 complaints regarding short-term rentals. 2019 we had 19 complaints, and in 2020 we had 13 complaints, all of which were resolved by contacting the property owner and letting them know that there was a complaint received and that they were running a short-term rental. In most cases, they would change their ad to 30 days or more, or remove their advertisement completely. There were some cases where we had to send out notice of violation letters, and there are others where we weren't able to identify the property as a short-term rental at all, and there wasn't any evidence to support the complaint. So we have the current complaint process where we are able to get compliance with the property owners for the most part, but this proposed ordinance would allow a lot more tools to remedy these issues if there's any kind of disturbances of the peace or issues with parking or overcrowding in a property. So with the proposed ordinance, we would be able to use the higher fines, the $1,500, $3,000, and $5,000, as well as revoking or suspending a license. And I believe that the relationship that would be established between the short-term rental host platforms and the city would help monitor and curb any issues with those host sites.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging us a little bit. I just wanted to make sure we went through all the comments, and we did hear collectively as a city group here feedback from the community. I mean, there was multiple emails that were received regarding the issues and concerns regarding the impact to community character, protecting and preserving the neighborhoods. I'll just close with this, and that is that the purpose of the ordinance today is to address an existing land use that occurs in the city, to regulate it, to limit its operation, similar to what's projected right now to be the number that is occurring in the city, and in essence bringing out of the shadows and having a regulatory scheme with monetary fines and additional safeguards if it is considered for adoption, the ordinance that puts us in a better position to enforce those regulations. There is a revenue associated with it. It will help bolster the enforcement process as well as the administration. Absent that, as noted by staff, a ban or status quo leaves us kind of in the same situation that we are now, and that is that absent these regulations, we would be addressing them on a case-by-case basis. How effective that is, I guess, is to be seen. But the non-compliant ones that we have really are about 10 to 12 that are, major problematic ones that I think these regulatory fines would affect them in the sense that it would really bring a dollar value to non-compliance. So with that said, I just wanted to make sure, just in closing, we did hear the community. We understand that this is a big issue of concern, and just wanted to put those things out there and acknowledge, the feedback that we received. So thank you for indulging us, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and discussion.
Oh, great. Thank you for all the extra information. I think it's helpful, and I think it probably gets to a lot of the questions we're going to have. On that note, does the board have any questions of staff? Vice Chair Rosati?
Thank you, Chair. And as always, I just want to thank staff in advance for their report. I know they work hard to put this together for us. I think it's only fair to disclose that our so-called stakeholders, the hospitality committee, you ask yourself, why in the world would a hotel support Airbnb? Well, let's not forget that they do get 1% of our TOT. So I don't think it would be in their best interest to voice their concern about this. And then our Chamber of Commerce, which is member-driven, business members that pay membership fees, it's only in their best interest to push this. So not so much about homeowners more than it is about revenue within our city. My questions are regarding HDL. Do we know how many accounts they have at the moment and how many employees they have?
Thank you, Vice Chair, for your question. We do have a representative from HDL who's here to answer a question. His name is Ryan George. Ryan?
Thank you. So, Mr. Rosati, are you wondering how many employees are dedicated to TOT type, or just in general?
I'm asking, how many accounts do you have with how many cities and how many employees do you have?
Okay, we have about, I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but as far as short-term rental accounts, we have roughly 3,000 that we're managing currently.
And how many employees do you have?
And that's across 14 clients.
And how many employees do you have?
Employees, we have 7.
You have 3,000 accounts that you're managing, and you only have 7 employees.
Dedicated to this particular work, yes.
Got it. Thank you. No more questions.
Do any other board members have questions for staff?
Hi, I have a quick question. Is there going to be a minimum stay? In other words, when we talk about short-term rentals, are we talking at least a minimum of 30 days, or is this something that's going to turn into a weekly rental? I didn't see it in the reports.
Thank you. A short-term rental is any stay of 30 days or less. It can be as little as 1 night, or it can be up to 30 days.
Yeah, that's a bit of a concern of mine, where you're going to have 2 and 3 night stays. I'm still pondering.
Tammy, you had a question?
I did. One comment going into this, before I even read your proposal, I was like, I'm one of those, heck knows. After reading it, though, well thought out, nice, a lot of great points. So I can see actually that there would be some benefits to the city on this. One question was, of all of those illegal operated short-term rentals we have now, do we have any idea how many of them are ADUs? I mean, a quick look that I looked at, it looked like the ones that were 300, 500 positive reviews that were Burbank are all ADUs that we're going to restrict. Yeah, any look at that? Do we have any idea?
We don't know the answer to that, but we will investigate it and see what we can find.
It kind of seems to me like we're putting so much restrictions on this that the ones that are operating within the city are not going to be able to operate anymore. So if we are bringing any benefit to those citizens that are doing this to, keep their property, we're going to do the opposite, which then leads me to think maybe we're not going to get the revenue that we think we're going to get. So what kind of exit plan would we have if, we get into this, 9 months into it and see, hey, we're not covering the cost on this because we haven't, the ones that can do that qualify for the licenses, there aren't enough.
Board Member Heiner, that's a very good question about, the eligibility that we're proposing today versus what's happening in reality when the fee is collected for the license and the TOT revenue. We have some data based on the software that HDL has about these types of listings, and we could double check on the question about ADUs, but in terms of eligibility, you're right. It's hard to predict, and we did our best to figure out certain factors that we wanted to include in that estimate, like, for example, the average rate per listing being $130 per night, the occupancy level that we're seeing, which is about a third of the year, and that's why staff is proposing 120 days per year. But it's something that we monitor through our departments like finance, community development, and it's something that we do monitor. If there is adjustment where we're realizing that, hey, our eligibility requirements is restricting people from participating and the anticipated revenue is not collected, then we would be able to adjust it during the budget process to say that what is being predicted, what didn't come up in reality, and a budget amendment would be required to require additional resources from our general fund to pay for the cost of the program. And so it's something that staff can bring up during the budget process for the city if there's any changes to the program about the costs in general. So that goes the same for an explicit ban. If we're realizing that there's additional resources that are needed, we would adjust it through the budget process or a separate council meeting to discuss the impacts of the current program.
And Board Member Heiner, I just want to clarify the rationale behind the ADU ban in staff's proposal. We included that because the City Council banned ADUs from being used as short-term rentals in the 2020 ADU ordinance that was passed, and that's why we included it here.
And Board Member, Chair Gamble, if I may add to that, Board Member Heiner, just to speak a little bit more about the cost, there are a couple of variable costs, if you will, in the enforcement proposal. So in the case where the program is not what we anticipated it will be, the code enforcement officer added to the program is a contract person. So we would need that person relative to the amount of enforcement needed. So of course that could be an adjusted cost as well as the staff assistant needed on a contract basis as well. So we will monitor this closely, not only with enforcement, but also the budgetary parameters as well.
Thank you. Last question. So based on all those responses that I saw in the presentation, it seems like this is definitely something that the residents are passionate about. Why wouldn't, have other cities done this as like a resolution on a ballot instead of something that council and a committee gets to decide for them?
Board Member Heiner, to respond to your question, what we've seen through neighboring cities is a mixture of responses actually related to short-term rental. We have seen cities that ban short-term rental and then they ended up allowing it, and then they either banned it or added more restrictions. And throughout the past decade, that's what we've seen, how cities have responded, where council can agendize this item and then they can choose to have a hearing whether they want to allow it, regulate it more, or ban it. And that's how cities, from what we've seen, have been responding.
So they respond, do it by city council because you'll be able to change it more quickly than it was on a ballot. Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions for staff. Just some technical things that kind of came up in some of the comments or the letters and just some of my curiosity. With the permits, how do you manage those? With 600, is it first come, first serve? Is it good for a year and renew? How, if it's filled up, how does someone get in on the program afterwards?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. The business license is going to be monitored through the online software that will be implemented by HDL. Through the online software, we'll be able to see on a first come, first basis of who is registered, and it'll be based on who has a completed application and that's been approved. That would be considered one. As soon as we get to that 600 limit at any given time, then we wouldn't be issuing any more business license. And the good thing about that software is that we'll be able to track and monitor this information on a daily basis. So we'll know immediately how many applications are in queue. And each license is good for 1 year, and then they would pay for their annual license.
Chair, if I can just maybe ask a question to clarify, just maybe I missed it and I apologize. Maybe you got it and it's a moot point, but just Karen, it's anticipated that it'll become first come, first serve for application submittal. And then once they're determined to meet the requirements of the program and they're in good standing, they could get their business license and renew it on an annual basis.
Correct.
And then last but not least, as spots open up, I anticipate every year there'd probably be a process by which you would go through and consider new applicants.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that a wait list in order, or is it a lottery, or is there any recourse also if someone gets a permit and they don't do anything with it? Can they just keep it permanent if they never rent out a unit?
That's correct. Their business license would be active for the year. If they choose not to use it, but they still keep it active, it would be up to that host. When they choose to cancel it, they can contact the city, and then that would kind of free up one license available.
Thank you. When with the TOT tax, I saw something. It looked like it was a flat tax for the host. Is there also a nightly tax for each visit?
So the TOT, as I understand it, is a nightly tax for each guest or for the cost of the room. So it's not a flat fee. It's a percentage of the cost of the room.
So in that chart where it said $130 for the TOT, was that an estimate of what you expect for that?
Yes, that is the case. That is an average. So we did some research and found that was the average cost of a room in Burbank in 2019. The average cost was about $130 for a nightly stay.
Okay. And so with the parking requirements, what are those requirements going to be?
I'm sorry, Chair Gamboa, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so there's off-street parking requirements for part of this program. What are those requirements going to be? Like how many off-street parking spaces are going to be needed to satisfy that?
For one bedroom short-term rentals, they will need one parking space. For two or more, they will need two off-street parking spaces.
Okay, so just a two, and that covers it.
Yes.
Thank you. And then just generally, it sounds like what I'm hearing is the platform, there's no recourse with the platforms in this. Because like in theory, it would make sense to be able to go to Airbnb and say, look, we don't allow these here. You can't list anything here. And then there's no listings in Burbank. But that sounds like it's not the case. Can you go over any experience you've had with trying to deal with the platforms and enforcing it on that end?
With the hosting platforms, during this process, they have been cooperative and outreach to city staff on on what they've learned about city regulations, and they've been cooperative in understanding that yes, cities have to regulate it, and so these are things that they've learned through best practices. One of the requirements that is in our proposed regulation is that they do have a liaison if they are a hosting platform. So in any situation where one listing needs to be taken down, they've been very cooperative in understanding the situation and helping the city with delisting any listings that are out of compliance. But to answer your question, there is no any monetary fines that are listed in our proposed regulations for a hosting platform. There's only regulations that they'll work with us in kind of monitoring these listings.
But if right now they're not allowed and you can go on Airbnb right now and see dozens of listings. How is that working with us to monitor that? Because those aren't allowed. They let them be up on their site.
That's a good question. And so today, we haven't had that conversation with them to delist any of the activities that are happening right now. We've been focused on the proposed regulations and seeing what will happen during this process.
Feels like a pretty big step to at least acknowledge like what their role can be, because if enforcement is an issue because of its case by case and called in, but we have a way to just cut it off at the head, why wasn't that explored?
Chair Gambo, if I may, I did most of the work on the enforcement and fine sections of the ordinance, and our city attorney office stance and position on it would be we would assess fines against the hosting platform if they continued to list an operator who's been in violation of our ordinance and we've actually notified them. The comfort level in doing that actually comes from a court case. It was a Ninth Circuit, a federal court case involving the city of Santa Monica, where they required the same thing. We actually mirrored the language in our ordinance with their language, just to feel comfortable with legislating. There's some federal statutes out there. There's First Amendment speech that a lot of companies would look to challenge the city's ordinance when you regulate something like this. But it was, again, their provisions were upheld by the Ninth Circuit, and we've actually almost copy and pasted their provisions entirely, with the exceptions of we have a slightly different fine amount structure, I believe. And also Santa Monica just does hosted only, whereas we are proposing tonight, hosted and unhosted.
Thank you for that clarification. But I guess just the heart of it was just, we haven't tried yet to have them delist any active Burbank short-term rentals that are currently not allowed. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of that. If maybe code enforcement or building.
Chair Gamboa. Hi. We haven't, with the complaints that we received, we haven't really addressed that specifically with the hosting platforms. Part of the reason is that their websites don't even indicate what the address is. So it would be difficult to explore the avenue with them without being able to identify the specific addresses on their websites.
I understand for the specific addresses part, but like, I guess my point is that you can go right now and see listings that specifically say Burbank. They list them in Burbank, even though they're not allowed. So it seems like if we're going to talk about enforcement and the cost of enforcement, the opportunities for enforcement, to kind of having a conversation with Airbnb to say, hey, can you not list these because they're not allowed? And while we work out our ordinance, it seems like that's kind of like the first step to understand all the options for enforcement, because I know it's hard to identify them. There's some you can go on, they have their own pages on Instagram that just advertise their Airbnbs for regular use, right? In Burbank, says Burbank Bungalow, right? So, you go in, it says Burbank, North Hollywood, Sun Valley, whatever. Obviously, Burbank is what we're thinking about. And that listing with that name in the title advertises Burbank. So it seems to be me that would be a quick and easy way to get a bunch of these off the platform and kind of get them in compliance, or even just figuring out the addresses for them to say these aren't illegal uses. So is it that we haven't had any of those conversations, or that they don't divulge any of that and aren't cooperative on that? It sounds like we haven't had those conversations at all.
Chair Gamboa, I'll address that. And part of it is strictly a resource issue where, yes, of course, our code is somewhat silent on it. And in doing so, we don't currently allow short-term rentals, but it's really not having the staff and the resources to address what we hope citizens will not partake in. This program, we highly believe that through its proposed regulation and also the funding measures that go behind it, plus the enforcement of the very high fines, there is that mechanism to look into those that are unlisted, the ones that do not register. It's simply a matter of calling staff not having the resources. And may I add that the reason that Lieutenant Puglisi of the Burbank Police Department is here tonight is to show that we have extensively worked out the enforcement aspect of this, where Burbank Police Department, they'll be familiar with the short-term rental parameters, would do what they always do, and that's protect lives and in peace and investigate disturbance of the peace. And in doing so, write the report, which we would then correspond with the police department to then investigate, code enforcement will, to look into the violations that occur. Presently, it's kind of a separate thing. Burbank Police would investigate disturbances of the peace, and it kind of just dies there. We don't know if it's a short-term rental or not. So this question came up before, and it's a very pointed and insightful question. Why aren't we doing enforcement now? And it's really a resource issue, which we believe this program will provide.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification. I think that I won't belabor this point, but so we can move on. But my point isn't necessarily the enforcement of these individual uses, but going directly to the platforms who are listing things that aren't allowed into the city to begin with, right? Like we went to the platform, we wouldn't have to deal with these resources to go to these individual sites. So, but I guess what I'm hearing is that we haven't had that conversation with Airbnb or VRBO to see if they would even just not list anything in Burbank until the regulations are sorted out.
You're right, Chair. We haven't had that conversation with them.
Right. I'm finished. If anyone else has any other questions.
Back on that a little bit, and just wanted to talk with Colin for a second about this. Just to get a little more granular on this, this is going to be a low barrier of entry, and it's going to be an extremely fragmented business. I mean, I know we're talking about Airbnb. I think that's just one of the platforms. I don't see where there's any filters coming in where you're going to have individuals just simply advertising for their house. And going from, as you would say, a reactive to a proactive enforcement sounds to me extremely complex and may or may not, and I don't have any information about this, that it's going to cost more money than right now than what we think. I may be wrong on that. I don't know, but all I can tell is that this market is going to explode. And I think that the enforcement, the penalties, may not be a sufficient deterrent from this market just ballooning out of control. Right now, that's my thoughts.
Okay, I think it sounds like we're done with questions for staff. I'm going to declare the hearing closed and the planning board will now deliberate. What is the planning board's pleasure? Vice Chair Rosati.
Thank you, Chair. This is a billion-dollar industry. It's big business, investor-driven. The map on Exhibit D shows Airbnb operating right now in our city. And how much TOT have they paid us? None. They're stealing from us. And yet, these are the very same people that we want to now partner with. Right now, they're not following the rules. Why in the world would we think that they would follow the rules in the future? And just for the record, nobody is losing their home because they can't Airbnb it. You can rent out your home for 29 days or more. You can rent it out for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You don't need to Airbnb your house to save it. We keep chipping away at our single-family neighborhoods and turning them into something that's different than what they're zoned for. We have hotels that are zoned for short-term rentals. That's what they're there for. I'm not for turning our residential neighborhoods into businesses. It's inconsistent with our housing goals and affordable housing goals. We keep saying that we want more housing, but we keep taking away housing and giving it to investors, and they're really the only ones that are winning with Airbnb and ADUs. My question is, when are we going to take a stand and protect our single-family homeowners and tenants? Homeowners who are paying $10,000 a year in property taxes for an $800,000 house. And by the way, good luck trying to find an $800,000 house. Tenants that are paying as much as $1,800 minimum a month for a one-bedroom apartment. Don't these people have the right to quiet enjoyment of their rental unit, of their home? Do we want to become a transient community where people come and go? We no longer know who lives next door to us. Every day, someone new with a different set of circumstances. What about from the real estate aspect? You bought your home 30 years ago. You paid your taxes. You're a great member of the community. Now you need to sell your house. Move to another state, live with family, or maybe assisted living. Your life savings is in your home. Now you have to disclose to the new buyer that you live next door to a business, Airbnb, that's taken up shop next door to you. How many buyers are going to sign up for that at $800,000, $900,000, or $1 million at that price point? Staff draws the parallel that this is similar to Aunt B operating her piano business, teaching business from her house. The only difference is Aunt B is the homeowner. She's lived there 30 years. We all know who she is, not strangers in day and night. Exhibit E2 through Exhibit E20. There's 264 resident comments. More than 50% of the residents, 155 of those comments were not in favor of this ordinance. Today, we received 23 emails today, before the meeting, that was not in favor of this. The staff report gives a lot of upside, but not much downside. I would love to see the staff report showing how we can enforce the laws and protect our residents from illegal STRs, with fines of $1,500 up to $5,000 for the homeowner or the tenant of the Airbnb. Here are some articles. I did no research on this. Swear to my father, I did no research on this. But since the last meeting we had on this issue, every time I saw an Airbnb article, I printed it out. Harvard Business Review. Across the United States found that Airbnb is having a detrimental impact on housing stock as it encourages landlords to move their properties out from long-term rentals and for sale markets into short-term residential markets. Knock LA. Here's how to and why you should fight against illegal Airbnbs in your neighborhood. Landlords have figured out the most profitable Airbnbs are the ones that sit completely empty when not used by tourists. This incentivizes landlords, leasing companies to displace long-term tenants so that they can use the vacant units. Who does it benefit? Who does it to make short-term? Who does it benefit to make short-term vacation stays and apartment hotels a hot commodity? The speculative market, the investor. East Bay Times. Airbnb, tough to enforce. The ordinance is not proactively enforced, and rentals on Airbnb platform are not regularly cross-checked with city list registered homes. What recently happened in the city of Sunnyvale highlights the issues most cities are facing. Having somebody operate their home as a short-term rental, they have it on a platform, but they're not registered with the city. Bloomberg, chasing housing target massive pools of Airbnb rentals. My Burbank, right here in Burbank. The housing commoditization trend and short-term vacation rental conversions will only exacerbate the housing shortage. East Bay Times. Council passes permanent ban on short-term no-host rentals and Airbnb. Sacramento Bee. No new vacation rentals. Placer County passes urgency ordinance amid Tahoe housing crisis. One of our very own city council members, a direct quote, who used to work for Airbnb, "It's rife with abuse. The company does not protect the host or the guest, resulting in massive lawsuits." The staff report allows STRs for 120 days. Most people rent STRs Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, usually leave Sunday. So if you're a homeowner or rent your apartment, 95% of your weekends, when you want your quiet enjoyment, are now impinged by Airbnb. Most importantly, by keeping the existing laws in place, it gives the homeowner a chance to defend themselves against the business being run next door. There is no defense. This is the most important part of this. There's no defense once we strip away our laws. Take a look at the desert communities, and I'm glad staff did. They've been utterly destroyed by Airbnb. The city of Palm Desert reverted its decision, no more short-term rental permits, increased their fines from $250 up to $5,000. The city of La Quinta, 2 months ago, July 2021, no more permits for short-term rentals. Same with Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells. Changing the rules midstream on our residents and homeowners is not fair, especially at the price that you've paid for your home and the taxes that you pay. Everything that I have read, our communities no longer allowing short-term rentals because it's ruining their communities. Why in the world would we jump into this? I understand that the robbers are robbing the bank, but we don't legalize robbing banks. Maybe we should hire this company, HDL, to enforce our rules and go after, at $3,000 a clip and go after the people that are illegally operating this. Maybe that's the tack that we should use. I'll listen to the rest of what our planning board members have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board Member Heiner, Board Member Monaco, any comments you'd like to share?
Hi. Yep. So, board members had excellent points. The discussion we had earlier about all the city councils and how quickly they have to keep reacting over and over again, and the back and forth and changing the rules to try to stay ahead of it. It does make it seem that it is just a bad idea, or that it is opening us up to things we don't want to have happen in the city. Thank you.
I have to agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Rosati. I just feel that this is an unenforceable situation. I think there's going to be just an explosion of unregulated rental properties. And I think it's bad for Burbank. I think it's bad for neighborhoods. And again, Airbnb, they don't care what we think about Airbnb. Airbnb is a process. They will form a platform and they will allow people to use their platform in advertising to rent their houses. They don't have any, they don't answer to us. So I find it very difficult to go forward with this.
Thank you, board members. I want to thank Vice Chair Rosati for his points. I think that was a very impassioned speech and evidence that I think points to a lot of issues that I think we all have with this this concept. I think of the of allowing these basically hotels in our neighborhoods or residential uses when we have a need for homes for people to actually live in. And having stayed in Airbnbs over the years, I've seen the gamut from when there was actually a host that was there with you that you learned a little bit about the city from and gave you a map and gave you coffee in the morning or dropped off a bag full of breakfast things to make for to have breakfast, the actual be part of it. And now it's you go to a place and they're just staged, whole houses just staged to anticipating people are going to come in with nothing there to plan, knowing that they're going to break stuff, right? Or anticipating breaking stuff. So I think all those are true in research, true in perception, and I think true in practice, which unfortunately hurts the people who are
We lost you out of your chair.
Can you hear me?
Can we get one of the board members that's on Zoom just to check the audio if you can
Zoom
say something?
and bring.
Oh, there we go, Matt. I think we try again.
Yeah, I think a little catching up. But I think that was my computer's point in telling me I'm finished. But I think we had I think the discussion is kind of leaning towards a way I think we agree. I think the planning staff did a great job with the directives they had. I constantly ask myself about what problem are we trying to solve for? And I think the problem of the TOT taxes don't outweigh the problems of housing and affordability and just access for people to have a place to live. So I think as the planner in me kind of looks at it as like these are intrusions to places where people can be vulnerable, and I'm not a fan of them. So All that being said, I think Mr. Rosati, Vice Chair Rosati has a comment.
No, go ahead and finish, Chair.
Oh no, I was going to move it on, but if you have a comment, please, Chair.
I was just going to make a motion to explicitly ban the option with stiff penalties. So my motion is to explicitly ban Airbnbs. That's the option that we have with the stiff penalties, the $1,500, $3,000, $5,000.
So just to clarify, Vice Chair, it'd be to ban the short-term rentals.
Explicitly ban short-term rentals. That was one of the options that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the fines that were associated in the staff report.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a second for that motion?
I'm sorry, can I just get another clarification here? Are you making a motion to ban STRs?
Yes.
Or just, okay, thank you. I second the motion.
And the issuer, the maker of the motion and the second, just to clarify, this would be a recommendation to the council to establish a ban on short-term rentals with the associated fines.
Correct.
Okay.
Board Member Heiner?
Yes.
Board Member Monaco?
Sorry about that, computer. Again, I just want to make sure I'm agreeing with Mr. Rosati. So if that's a yes, then it's a yes.
Vice Chair Rosati?
Yes.
Chair Gamboa?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone, for that discussion. And the next item is oral communications. Now is the time for oral communications from the public. Any person speaking during this period may address the board on any matter concerning city business. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. To participate, please call 818-238-3335. The phone lines are now open. Please bear with us as it may take a couple minutes for the first callers to get through the line. Again, the number is 818-238-3335.
Chair, we do have one call coming through the queue.
Great, thank you.
Jonah, you're on live with the planning board.
Thank you. Hi, Planning Board. Again, thank you very much for your time and your effort, and also to the staff that worked up the proposal. I sincerely agree with Mr. Rosati, and I hope that we could somehow move to enforce some of the illegal Airbnbs now. And if that starts to work out and maybe create some sort of method of attacking them, I know that the gentleman who said, Colin Ogle, code enforcement, I was shocked to hear that there were only 13 that he claimed for last year for 2020 on complaints. I'm just staggered by that number. But anyway, other than that, if we could somehow figure out how to correct the current issue, then maybe if that gets resolved, we could repropose something in the future. Thank you so much for your time and your effort.
We do have one more call.
Teresa, you're on live with the planning board.
Okay. So I'm like really pissed off right now because I don't understand why all of you are lumping Airbnb people as these evil people who don't give a damn about their neighborhoods or the quality that they provide to their Airbnb people. It's really not fair, especially nowadays when people have lost jobs due to COVID, have no income, and this is supplemental. This is not right that you're lumping everybody into this group of evil Airbnb people that don't give a damn about anybody. And actually, you know what? If I could not rent out my unit to a person permanently, I would not even want to do that because the way rental people are nowadays, no, I don't want that. I need short-term rental to supplement income, and I am not interested in doing long-term rentals with anybody in any way, shape, or form. So you are not losing any housing whatsoever. So, if you want to create a tax, fine, but do not take away my supplemental income. I am a responsible person. I take care of my people. I make sure that they are good. I am here 24/7 on my property to make sure that they are good tenants. And I give them a real good, pleasant stay and represent Burbank very well. And I'm very upset. I apologize, but I am upset that you're lumping every Airbnb person as some type of evil person. Thank you.
Another call is coming through the queue. Chair.
Hello, Renee. You're on live with the planning board.
Hi, I just want to thank Mr. Rosati, if I'm pronouncing your name right. I really appreciate you speaking up on behalf of us, the neighbors here in Burbank, and thank you so much for speaking up and saying you want to ban the short-term rentals. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
There are no more callers in the queue.
Thank you. There being no further public comment, I now declare the public comment period closed. Now is the time for reports from city staff. Are there any reports?
Chair, there are no reports.
Okay, thank you. Now is the time for the approval of the minutes from August 9th, 2021 planning board meetings. Are there any questions, comments, and or motion?
I can move that, Chair.
Any seconds?
Second.
Board Member Heiner?
Approved.
Board Member Monaco,
Approved.
Vice Chair Rosati,
Yes.
Chair Gamboa.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now is the time for introduction of additional agenda items. Planning board members may introduce new items for discussion, but no action may take place except to place the item on a future agenda. Do members of the board have any items to introduce? Yes, Vice Chair Rosati.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question for staff. On the 27th, it looks like we have a pretty big project that we're going to look at. Are we going to do a job walk on that?
Yes, we'll be setting that up shortly. We'll also be sending you some information that's already readily available so that you can have it ahead of the meeting. And that's for the 27th of September, and it's the Fry's project.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll be reaching out to the individual board members, and we'll probably end up doing field visits. So we'll check on your availability, and then we'll walk the site, planners, and the project applicant with you, and we'll do that well before the meeting time, the date of the meeting itself. So, yeah, thank you for reminding us.
Is there anything else from any planning board members? Okay. Now is the time for city planner comments. Any comments from the city planner?
Just one, I wanted to thank the board. Thank you for all the great feedback and input and discussion, especially our two new board members. Thank you for your input. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned to you when we had our introduction, this is an interesting effort. As you bring your individual skill sets and your knowledge as not only a resident, but your past expertise in your particular fields to bear. And it's amazing how, when you really look at all this, how having a diversity on the board and having a robust discussion is helpful, not only for you all to consider an item, but also feedback to staff. So we're very appreciative of that input as always, and look forward to bringing other items to you. And so hang in there. Thank you very much for all your effort. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. We now adjourn to the next online planning board meeting on Monday, September 13th at 6 p.m. The public is invited to view the meeting online or on television and will be able to provide public comment in the following two ways: by leaving an e-comment on the city webpage at www.burbankca.gov/e-comments, or by calling in directly to the planning board meeting at 818-238-3335. Thank you all for your participation and have a good night.
Hey Matt, you got us all dying over here. Let us see your baby.
All right. Jen, can I get Bronwyn?
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
There you go. We hear you.
Yeah.
We hear you.
Say hi.
Very good.
She's clicking leave meeting, so thank you all.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Night.
All right.